Here is a brief introduction of Professor C. Chandrasekhar. Professor is currently working as a professor since 2010 in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Madras. He received his B.Tech degree from Sri Venkateswara University, Tirupati, received his M.Tech degree and PhD degree from IIT Madras. He was Japanese Society for Promotion of Science, JSPS postdoctoral fellow at Nagoya University, Japan. Professor Chandrasekhar sir has received the Srimati Marti Anupama Gurunath Award for Excellence in Teaching at IIT Madras. He has been an investigator for 14 sponsored research projects. He published about 135 papers in referred journals, edited volumes, and in the proceedings of international and national conferences. He supervised 9 PhD theses and 17 MS theses. He is currently supervising 2 PhD students and 2 MS students. He was a general co-chair of a international conference, a reputed conference, InterSpeech 2018, conducted by International Speech Communication Association at Hyderabad. He is a member of Board of Governors of IIT Madras. His teaching interests are pattern recognition, machine learning, deep learning, and computer architecture. His current research interests are speech processing, visual captioning, deep learning, semi-supervised learning, and distance metric learning. On behalf of Department of Computer Science and participants, I welcome Professor C. Chandrasekhar sir, and also my heartfelt welcome to the FTP coordinator, Professor B.S. Shekhar, chairperson of the department, Professor H.L. Shashireka madam, and Professor Sharmila Kumari, vice principal of PA Engineering College, and all dear participants. Now, we will move on to the technical session by Professor C. Chandrasekhar sir. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning everyone. I'd like to thank her for the very generous introduction and I would like to thank Professor Shekhar for inviting me to give this talk here, and I'd like to thank all the faculty of the department for giving me this opportunity to visit this place. Okay. So you're going to have a fairly long session with me today, about 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. I'll try to make it as light as possible, okay, because I always believe in that we should carry the audience with us rather than dumping too many things on their heads, okay. So please feel free to stop me at any point of time if you have any questions, okay. What I'm going to cover is more or less compressed version of the material that we cover in a 1 full semester course. Obviously, what is covered in about 55 hours cannot be covered in 4 hours with that kind of a detail. So my target will be to convey the main principles of the deep learning techniques and give kind of an exposure to the different deep learning models that are being currently explored for variety of problems. I am not an expert in the medical image processing, okay? So I may not be able to give any examples related to medical image processing, but I'll try to give you a few examples in general image processing, video processing, and the text processing. And you are the kind of experts in the medical image processing, so you must be able to relate how these techniques can be used for the problems of your interest, okay? At the end of these sessions, I would expect you to get a fairly good idea about the different deep learning models, and then follow it up with reading of the relevant material. Lots of papers are there, and of course a few good textbooks are there, right? In order to consolidate your understanding, it's important that you go through those research papers. As you might be already knowing, this is a very dynamic area. Things keep changing very often, okay? So one has to read the relevant research papers in order to pick up the material of these models, okay? I understand that there has already been some introduction to machine learning, and also I think some introduction to the convolutional neural networks. So I'll try to minimize that part, okay? Then focus on the other models. Okay. So I show you a few images here. I want to take a few seconds to observe what is shown there and tell me whether we have any difficulty in solving this problem. What is the problem here? Given an image, I want to identify the animal that's present in the image, right? There are 5 images for each of the types of 4 animals in the slide there. Do you have any difficulty in identifying the images, animals in any of the images? Good. But are the images exactly the same? Are the images in a particular row, are they exactly the same? But all of them have the same type of animal. Is the animal of the same size in all the images? Is the background same, right? And is the picture taken from the same view? No, right? You can see that there are so many variations that occur when you take these kind of images, but we don't have any difficulty in identifying the animal in each of these images. What happens if I give you not 5 images, but I give you, let's say, 500 images of each of these animals? What will be the consequence of that? There will be a lot more variations, right? Because no 2 images will be exactly the same, right? So there will be a lot more variations among the images of the same animal. But again, humans don't have any difficulty in identifying the animal, right? How are we able to do that? Right? That's something that we want to understand. Even today, we don't have a good understanding of how the humans do all these tasks, okay? But when I want to develop what is called a pattern classification system, the task here is, given an image like this, the system should tell what is the animal that's present in the given image, and if the number of examples that's collected for each class is large, typically we have the problems like what is called the intra-class variability. What do you mean by that? There are variations among the examples of the same class, and your pattern classification system should be robust to those variations. Irrespective of all those variations, the system should be able to tell that this is the animal that's present in the given image, okay? So though this pattern recognition research work started about 60 years ago, we still address the same fundamental problem because of the complexity of the problem. And here I am showing 4 classes of animals, but how many different types of animals are there in the universe? There are, I think, hundreds of types of animals, right? So if I have to consider all those hundreds of types of animals, what is the issue? The number of classes will be larger. The number of rows of this image will be larger, right? And among these classes, there will be many pairs of classes which are similar to one another, right? All of us know that there are some pairs of animals which are very similar to one another, right? Then the challenge is how to distinguish between similar classes. This is what is referred to as the inter-class confusability, right? As the name itself implies, what is the kind of confusion that we have between pair of classes. So basically, in pattern recognition, we deal with these two problems. One is the intra-class variability. The other one is what is called the inter-class confusability or the discriminability, right? And even though we have very sophisticated techniques nowadays, still we can't solve many real-world problems with 100% accuracy, mainly because of these two challenging and fundamental issues with the task. Let's see this set of examples. Here also we have some classes. The names of the classes are given on the top. And in each column we have a few images of each of these classes. Which of these two tasks is tougher? The previous one or this one? This one. Good. Why? Your answer is correct. What is the reason? Is there any object of interest here? Is there any specific object of interest? Unlike in the previous case, right? So you have to look at the content of the complete image in order to tell to which class that image may belong to, right? And also you can see that there are many pairs of classes which are very close to one another, like inside city and street are very close, right? Coast and open country are very close, right? So developing a classification model for this kind of data is a much more challenging task, right? And also, how are these images represented? Basically, typically how do we represent an image in a computer system? Yeah, typically each image consists of a number of pixels, and we have the color information about each of the pixels, and also what is called the intensity, right? And typically, what is the number of pixels in an image? Nowadays, all of you use cell phones, right? And when you buy the cell phones, one of the specifications that you look at are what are called the resolutions of the cameras on the cell phones. What is the typical resolution we are talking about? Some number of megapixels, right? What is 1 megapixel? It's 10 power 6 pixels. That's typically you have 1000 rows and 1000 columns of the pixels, right? And as you go for more and more number of megapixels, then there are more number of pixels in each of the rows and the number of columns, right? So if you want to represent the information that's present in the image at the raw level, then the number of values that you have to use is going to be very large, because for every pixel you have to use the information about three colors, three primary colors, red, green and blue, right? And one intensity level, right? So there are 4 numbers to be used to represent each pixel, right? And even if each number is represented by 1 byte, I am sure all of you know what is a byte here, right? So it requires so many megabytes to represent the image. And as we'll be already saying, if I want to feed this image as directly the input to the neural network model, right, then the number of nodes in the input layer will be very large, right? And the complexity of the model will be much higher, and therefore the number of parameters that you need to estimate will be very large. And what is the main guiding principle for training the neural network models? The number of training examples should be 10 times the number of parameters in the model. And all of these should be what are called the labeled examples. What do you mean by the labeled examples? For each image here, I know what is the class label, right? So, depending on the complexity of the model, the number of parameters is going to be different, and accordingly we should have sufficiently large number of labeled examples to train these models. But for a given task, finding the large number of labeled examples is a complex task. And nowadays we are looking at not only the supervised learning techniques, I'm sure all of you would have been exposed to that. What do you mean by supervised learning techniques? Yeah, we give the labeled examples to train the model, and then we go through the process of building the model, in the sense that we estimate the parameters of the model. Nowadays there is a lot of interest on how to make use of the unlabeled examples along with some labeled examples in what is called the semi-supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and so on, right? And when it comes to deep learning models, we'll be seeing that we'll be following some different strategies, right, to make use of both these labeled and the unlabeled examples. We'll come back to that later. Here also I'm showing you some images, but I'm not telling any labels about these images, right? but I want to form groups of these images. I'm not telling you how many groups. Can you tell me how many groups can be formed for these images? I'm sure all of you will be able to do this. What is the criteria for forming the groups? Yeah, all the elements in the group should be similar, right? How do you define the similarity? Cosine similarity, if you compute some feature vector and then compute that, but do we do that? Yeah, we are looking at the images and then trying to form the groups, right? I don't think our brain computes any cosine similarity, right? Yeah, we look at the content of the images and then try to form the groups. Okay. Yeah, any answer to the question? How many groups you would like to form in this case? 4. 4. Okay. Any other answer? Okay, what can be these 4 groups? Nature, okay. Sorry? Temples, okay. Water, okay. Mountains, okay. Indoors, okay, good. I thought I already got 4, more than 4. Okay. Actually, there is no unique answer to this, right? It all depends on what kind of similarity you are looking at what level of similarity that you are looking at, right? I'll give you one type of grouping. Is this reasonable? Right? So you can say that all the images in the top row belong to something like interiors of residences. The next one is mountains. The next one is military vehicles. The last one is sunsets and sunrises, right? And the fourth one is actually what we called as the sacred places. Are the images really similar there? Except they have some buildings, right? Are the buildings similar? No. But why do you want to put them into the same group here? Yeah, because we know that each of that buildings corresponds to a place of worship, right? And therefore, based on that commonality among those images, you want to put them together, right? But how do we decide on this? Right? If you look at the image level similarity, right, there is very little similarity between those images, right? We use what is called a higher semantic content based similarity. That is, we know that each of that corresponds to a place of worship. Therefore, all those images should be put into a single group, right, called as the places of worship or the sacred places, right? So nowadays, the challenging tasks are related to how to extract what is called the semantic content from the images. What is it we normally use? The visual content. That is what we can see, right? But what is the content we can perceive from the image is what is called the semantic content. And for many of the challenging tasks that the deep learning models are being explored, require how to extract this semantic content from the images. Let's look at what is called a retrieval task. I'm sure all of you do what is called a Google search normally, right? What is it to do in the Google search? You typically give a keyword, right, and search for the places where the information about that keyword are available, right? That's a text-based retrieval, right? I give some keywords, then we perform the matching of the keywords with the content of the different websites, and then see where we have the relevant information, right? In the same way here, can you do what is called a image retrieval? I have a set of images, right? Then I'll give a query, then I want to retrieve all the images in the database which are satisfying this query, right? In this case, I give the image itself as a query, right? So you can see that I'm giving some image where there is a tower as a query image. Now I have a database of images. I want to retrieve all the images in database which are similar to this query image. So one way of doing this is extract a set vector of features from the given image, and you also have the feature vectors extracted from all the images. Then you can compute what is called the cosine similarity between the feature vectors of the query image and the image in the database, and then look at which of these images in the database have the highest cosine similarity value, and then retrieve those images as the relevant images. But what is the performance of this dependent on? It all depends on what features we extract from the image and what measure of similarity is used to compare the images. Is it guaranteed that you are looking at the semantic content of the image? Unless you extract the features that are related to the semantic content of the image. So the performance of this retrieval system will depend on what features you extract, what kind of similarity measure that you use, right? And depending on the type of features that are extracted from the images, right, your retrieval will be better. Another way of doing this retrieval is, instead of giving a query image, you may give some keyword, like what we do in the text-based search, right? Now I want to retrieve all the images which have some information or some content related to the keyword. What is the keyword I am giving here? Tiger. And what is it I want to look for now? All the images where the tiger is present. How do we do this now? Yeah, now for each of the images in the database, I need to tell what are the objects of interest that are there, right? These are what are called the semantic concepts or the visual concepts. Like you can see that for each of the images here, I have multiple labels, right? Like here it says horse and greenery, here it says tiger and greenery, bear and ice, and so on, right? How to get that is a different task, okay? Suppose that kind of labeling is done. Now is this retrieval a simple process, right? What is it I have to do now? I have to check what is the keyword, and I have to check whether each of the images have that keyword in its set of labels. If it is present there, then you retrieve that image, right? But what is the challenging task here? How do you come up with these labels? Is the number of labels same for all the images? No, because it all depends on how many different objects of interest are there, right? And this task is what is called as multi-label classification. What was the earlier one? For every image we are giving only single label, right? So it's called as the single label classification, whereas here it's called the multi-label classification, and it's also called as what is known as the annotation, because you are giving some description of the content of the image in terms of these visual concept labels or the semantic concept labels, right? So basically we perform what is known as the multi-label classification task to do this annotation, so that for any given image you come up with this set of labels, right? And once this set of labels is identified for each of the images, then you can perform the retrieval task. Again, the performance of the system depends on how well we are able to do the annotation. Okay. Nowadays we are looking at even more challenging problems, right? This is what is called the image captioning. I am sure all of you read some textbooks or papers, right? And in each of these books or papers, typically there will be some figures and tables, right? And for each of these figures and tables, there will be a few sentences that describe content of the table or the figure. What is it we call that as? The caption for the table or caption for the figure. What is the purpose of that? When you are trying to look at what is there in the figure or table, this caption will guide us to understand what is the content of the figure or table, right? Now I want to do the similar thing for an image. That is, given an image, I want to come up with one or more sentences that describes the content of the image, right? Like we give a caption for a figure or table, here we want to give a caption for an image, right? This is what is called the image captioning task, right? So if you take the example on the top, what is the kind of description that you can give? You can see that it's a market. You can call it as a vegetable market. Then there are some people, at the market. One caption that can be given is a group of people at an outdoor market. But this is not necessarily the only way you describe the content of that figure. If I ask each of you to come up with one sentence to describe the content of this image, right, each of you will come up with some slightly different sentences, right? But as long as the content of the image is captured, right, then do you have a question? Oh, okay. Yeah. So now can we develop a system which can be trained with the training examples? It's also supervised learning. But what is the training data going to be? An image and one or more captions that are given by the humans, right? And I want a system to be trained using this labeled data. And after the system is trained, for a new image, I want the system to come up with the caption for that, right? What is a caption? One or more sentences. What is a sentence? Is the number of words in each sentence the same? No, right? So typically the number of words in a sentence can vary from one sentence to another sentence, right? So there are so many variations that can occur, right? And typically when you say a sentence, that sentence should be grammatically correct sentence in a language, right? That's what we normally find in the textbooks, right? Though nowadays when you use all this social media, we don't really pay attention to the grammar and so on, right? But typically we want to generate a syntactically correct sentence and also a semantically meaningful sentence, right? That forms part of the caption for a given image, right? Another example is shown in the bottom here, where we try to kind of come up with some description of the different parts of the image. Like you can see that this part corresponds to camera, the woman, this part corresponds to camera, this part corresponds to cat, and so on, right? So basically, we are splitting this image into different what are called the regions of interest, and then trying to come up with one or more labels for each of these regions of interest, right? And then we want to put those labels together to form a syntactically correct and a semantically meaningful sentence. So after we do this, finding the regions of interest and then coming up with the labels for each of the regions for interest, then we can put all these labels together to generate the caption like a woman holding a camera in crowd. Okay. So basically, instead of taking the complete image and then try to come up with the sentence here, we try to form the regions of interest, and for each region of interest, we try to identify some labels, right? And then we put all these labels put together to form the sentence. So basically, this aids the process of this caption generation, right? Now, all of you have some exposure to the machine learning, right? What is the challenging task here? I have to get the content of the image represented, right? Then that content of the image has to be described in a sentence in a particular language, right? I mean, though we are looking at the captions in English, right? But typically one can talk about generating the captions in any of the languages, right? So the system should be able to understand the content of the image and then generate sentences, right, which can vary in terms of the number of words from one sentence to another sentence, and all this collection of sentences put together forms the caption for the given image, right? So this is a much more challenging task than the simple image classification task or a image retrieval task, mainly because it requires generation of text as the output of the model. So nowadays we are looking at coming up with a very detailed description of the content of an image or a video also. We can extend the same thing for video also. This is what is referred to as the dense captioning. If you are generating multiple sentences from an image, we refer to it as the dense image captioning, or what is called the image paragraph captioning. What do you mean by that? For a given image, it's not one sentence that you want to generate. You want to generate a paragraph of sentences, right? That gives a very detailed description of the content of the image. And we also want to do the same thing for a video. Typically, the video will have several events, right? And each part of the video will correspond to an event. And what is a video? Physically, it's a sequence of frames, right? And what is each frame? An image, right? So now we want to look at all the frames in the given video. First identify the clips in the video, and then identify what is the event that can be associated with each of these clips, and then come up with some description of the content of each of these clips with the one or more sentences, and then put all these sentences together, right, to form a paragraph that describes the content of the video. So as an example that's shown here, there are 4 clips, and for each of the clips we are coming up with a sentence. I hope you can read this, right? For the first clip, it says that an elderly man is playing the piano in front of crowd. For the second clip, it says a woman walks to the piano and briefly talks to the elderly man, and so on, right? And then we have 5 such sentences generated, and all these 5 sentences are put together to form a detailed paragraph caption for the complete video, right? And typically this is done by doing what is called the detection of the events. That's what is called the event proposal module. Then describe the event for each of them. Then that becomes the captioning module for each event. Then you put all these captions together to form the caption for the complete video. And because it generates more or less like a paragraph for a given video, this is what is called the dense video caption, right? Again, we can ask the humans to look at the given video and then give a description of the content of the video as a paragraph. Like that, we can generate the training data. Then after that, I want to build a model which can be trained with these training examples, so that after training, if I give a new video, then the model should be able to tell me what is the paragraph corresponding to the content of the video. Okay? As we will see later, there are several deep learning models one can explore to perform these tasks. Okay? Few more tasks at which the humans are very good at doing, but it's not easy to develop the systems which can do this, right? These are what are called the visual linguistic tasks, and one of these tasks is what is called the question answering system. Okay? There are 2 types of question answering systems. One is what is called the textual question answering system. Other one is what is called the visual question answering system. Yeah. What is it we do in the textual question answering? Like we normally do in the exams, right? We ask a question, right? We want to come up with an answer for that question, right? So both the question and answer are in the form of the text, right? That's why it's called the textual question answering. And what type of questions we may ask? It can be multiple choice type questions, right? I give the question, I give the multiple options, then I want to select one of the options as the answer for that question, right? Or I give only a question, I don't give any multiple options, but I want the person to give an answer for that, right? It can be a one-word answer, or it can be a sentence as the answer, right? So in one case we are talking about multiple choice type questions, right, where we give the options for the answer and then we want the person to give one of the options as the answer. Another one is what is called a open-ended question answering, where I give only the question, but we don't give any multiple choices, right? But we want the person to come up with an answer for that question, right? Now the same thing we can talk about. I will give an image, then I will ask a question, then I want to come up with an answer for that question, either by the multiple choice type or open-ended type, right? Look at the first example here. I have this image here, then I am asking this question, is there something to cut the vegetables with? Right? The answer is yes for the top image here and no for the bottom image here, right? Yeah. How do you come up with this answer here? I need to understand the content of the image, I need to understand the question, I need to look for some entity that can be used to cut the vegetables, and all of us know that one can use a knife to cut the vegetables. Then I have to specifically look for the knife in the given image. If that knife is present in the given image, the answer is yes, otherwise the answer is no, right? These are the kind of tasks which are the humans are very good at. These are what are called cognition tasks, right? Where we recognize the objects, then we understand the question, then we relate the question to the objects in the given image, and then come up with the answer, right? Now again we want a system to be developed to do this task. What are the inputs to this system? An image, yeah, the question in the form of a text, right? And if it's a multiple choice type questions, the 4 options, right? And as part of the training, we'll also have the correct answer given to that. So we need to take all these 4 types of inputs as the input of the system during the training. And after the system is trained, I give a new image, I give a new question, new multiple options for the answer, and I want the system to come up with the correct option for the answer, right? By understanding the content of the image, by understanding the question, then looking at the options, then determining which of these options is the answer for the given question, right? This is what is called the visual question answering system that one needs to develop in order to perform this kind of a task, right? Again, there's a lot of work going on that uses the deep learning models, right, to perform these tasks, right? We'll be looking at some of the models which can be used to perform these tasks. The next one we have here is what is known as comprehending the expression of the faces of the person, right? Here we are giving an image, then we want to know whether there is a person who has some expression on the face, okay? So the answer can be like woman on the right, or the right woman, or the woman on the right with the white shirt, and so on, right? There is no unique way of answering the question, right? Because when you ask different people to answer the question, right, the different answers will be there, but all of them are correct, right? But what does this task involve? We need to look at the complete image, then we have to identify the regions where the faces of the persons are there, then most importantly, whether there is some kind of an expression on the face. And if you also want to know what kind of expression it is, then it requires what is known as emotion recognition, face emotion recognition. Somebody can be happy, somebody can be sad, somebody can be angry, right? Then you want to identify that type of an emotion just from the face information that is available. Now, even more challenging task is what is shown here, where we not only come up with answers for the questions, we also want to find out the reason for the system to come up with that answer, right? Like I was asking you earlier some questions, then I was asking you to tell me how you arrived at that answer, right? So you told me some reason for coming up with that answer. In the same way here, right, in the task called the visual common sense reasoning, right, we have an image, we ask the question, here we give multiple choices, and one of the choices is going to be the answer for this question, right? Let's say the answer is this is a wedding, right? That is, in this image, the content indicates that there is a wedding. So the answer to this question, where is this happening, is that there is a wedding. Now I want the system to come up with a reason for coming up with this answer, right? Again, the reasons can be multiple choice type. Now, if this answer is correct, I want to come up with the correct reason, or what is called the rationale, to explain how we come up with this answer. Again, there are 4 options. The correct option here is person 1 is dressed fancily and the background is fancy. Typically in a wedding scenario, right, persons are dressed fancily and the backgrounds are also fancy, right? So that is the reason why we say that this is a wedding in response to this question, right? So we are coming up with a reason for the answer, and all of this is mainly based on common sense, which the humans are kind of equipped with, right, as we grow, right? It will not be there when you are a child, but typically as you grow, we develop this ability to use common sense to perform the reasoning, right? That's why even a small child can come up with an explanation of how to come up with the answer for a given question, right? So this is what is called the common sense reasoning, but because the input is the image data, we are referring to it as the visual common sense reasoning. Instead of the image, it can also be a video, right? We can ask the similar kind of questions, come up with an answer, then we ask the system to come up with the reasons for the answer. Okay? Yeah. Any questions? So basically what we are looking at is much more challenging task than what we were looking at about 20 to 25 years ago in the machine learning field. Most of the focus of the machine learning techniques till about 2005 have been mainly on the classification tasks or the annotation tasks and so on, right? But with the invent of the deep learning models, right, the focus has shifted to much more challenging problems because there are models which are capable of solving these problems, right? So we want to understand what are these models and how these models can be used to solve these challenging problems. And there are, if there are some tasks in your domain, let's say in the medical image processing domain, right, where this kind of tasks are there, then you can start exploring these deep learning approaches for solving those problems. Okay. Now we'll get into more technical details, right? I just wanted to give you a flavor of what kind of challenging tasks are being explored in the current day deep learning research, right? Before we go into details of the models that can be used to perform these tasks. Okay. So we'll start with the simple classification task. I'm sure all of you have studied about some of the models that can be used, right? I think there was a session on artificial neural networks yesterday, right? So typically the model that we can use for the classification problem is what is known as the multi-layer feed-forward neural network. As the name itself indicates, there are multiple layers of neurons, right? And the neurons in one layer are connected to the neurons in the next layer. That's why it's called the feed-forward neural network, right? What we are showing here is a model with an input layer, an output layer, and one hidden layer. And the number of nodes in the input layer, capital K, corresponds to the number of classes. Let's say if you're talking about the image classification task where the animals are present, for the first example that I'm showing you, there are 4 classes, right? So if I'm going to build a model like this for that task, there will be 4 nodes in the output layer. One node will be associated with every class, right? And the number of nodes in the input layer corresponds to the number of features that we extract from the data, right? So if you are going to represent the image as raw pixel level information, as we have discussed already, I need to give about 4 million features as the input, right? That's going to increase the complexity of the model significantly, right? So normally we don't do that, right? So what is it we do? We process the content of the image using some image processing techniques and extract some suitable features from the given image. It can be what are called the color histogram features or the edge features or the texture features, right? Like, I mean, if you do a course on image processing, right, you will study variety of techniques to process an image and extract features. And typically we want the features to capture all the information that's present in the image. And at the same time, we want the number of features to be as small as possible. What is the reason? So that the number of nodes in the input layer can be small. Why do you want the number of nodes in the input layer to be small? What is the nature of model here? Every node in the input layer is connected to every node in the hidden layer. And every connection there is associated with one weight parameter, right? So what happens if the number of input nodes increases? The number of connections will increase, right? And therefore the number of parameters that you need to estimate will be larger. And typically the machine learning thumb rule is that the number of training examples should be at least 10 times the number of parameters in the model. Then only you can have a properly trained model. And all these examples should be labeled examples because you need to specify what is the desired output for each example, because for every label training example, you know what is the image and you know what is the class to which that image belongs to. So you need to specify that information and then train the model, right? So that's where the feature extraction from the image plays a very significant role, and typically one has to use the domain knowledge to identify what features to be extracted and how to extract the features from the image. What do you mean by domain knowledge? If there are natural images like what we have been seeing, right, I can use the color histogram features or the edge features and so on. But if they are medical images, are there colors in the medical images? Typically, if you get an X-ray image, right, are there any colors in that? No, right? Yeah, it will be typically gray level image, right? But there are some other medical images representation, like some scan images, you may get some color information, but the kind of color information that's present there is completely different from the color information that's present in the natural images, right? So one has to use the knowledge of that domain to see what kind of processing has to be done to extract the features from the image. So still the domain knowledge plays a very important role, right, in identifying what features to be extracted, how many features to be extracted and so on, right? So we'll assume that the number of features is decided by using the domain knowledge, that's some D, right? And the K represents the number of classes. But what is not specified here is what should be the number of nodes in the hidden layer, right? In this case, it's capital J. Unfortunately, there is no what is called a free lunch in machine learning. What do you mean by that? One has to do some number of experiments in order to come up with the suitable model for a given task, right? So there are what are called the hyperparameters, right? So in this case, this capital J is a hyperparameter. What is J here? The number of nodes in the hidden layer. There is no way to guess what is the best number of nodes in the hidden layer for solving a given problem. You have to try it with the different values of this J, build the model and then see how the model performs, and then see for what value of J the performance is the best, and then choose that value of J, right? So this experimenting has to be done in order to come up with the given model that fits well for the given data. Okay, I am not going to details of how to train this model, but I am sure all of you would have studied about this. But typically till about 2005, people were talking about this kind of models with only one or two hidden layers, right? And nowadays we call such models as the shallow neural networks, right? And models with more than two hidden layers are what are referred to as the deep feed forward neural networks, shortly called as the deep neural networks, right? And what you can see here is that we have the input layer and the output layer as in the previous case, but there are multiple hidden layers. In this case there are 5 hidden layers. Again, the number of hidden layers is another hyperparameter. For a given task, it's not possible to say whether 2 layers are good enough, or 3 layers are good enough, or 5 layers are good enough, right? One has to try out the different number of hidden layers, and each of these hidden layers you also have to decide on the number of nodes in the layers, right? So there are 2 hyperparameters, number of layers and the number of nodes in each of the layers. What happens as both of these increases? As the number of layers increases and the number of nodes in each layer increases, right, the number of connections in the model will be increasing. Therefore, the number of weights that you have to learn from the training examples will be increasing, right? So that's where the requirement of large number of training examples with the labeled data is very important for building these models. But why do you want to build models with more number of hidden layers? Yeah. Extract the deep features, okay. Why do you want deep features? That's the question. It's because of the complexity of the problem, right? As I was telling you right in the beginning, right? What are the 2 fundamental challenges? Intra-class variability and the inter-class confusability, right? And both these phenomena will be having a significant role when you go for complex problems where there are lots of variations among the examples of a class, and the number of classes itself is large, and there are several pairs of classes which are very similar to one another, and these are the cases where you need a fairly complex model to be used, and then you go for these multiple hidden layers, right, so that you can solve a complex problem. Why do you think these multiple hidden layers will help us to solve a complex problem? Okay, I'm not sure whether that has been taught session yesterday, right? We typically use what are called the activation functions in these neurons, right? I'm sure you would have been told about the different types of activation functions, right? One is what is called the logistic sigmoid function, right? Another one is the ReLU, right? What does ReLU stand for? Rectified linear unit, right? And all these kinds of functions that you are looking at are what are called the nonlinear functions. What do we mean by nonlinear function? What is a linear function? If I try to plot y versus x as a line, y is a function of x, right? But that relation is linear, right? Now if I plot y versus x as some kind of a parabola, right? What is the shape of a parabola typically? It's a U-shaped curve, right? Is it a line? It's not line, right? So anything that's not line is what is called a non-linear. So parabola is one type of non-linearity, right? So this rectified linear function, if you looked at the plot of output of the node versus the input, right? It's linear in the positive value of x and 0 in the negative value of x, right? And it's a combination of two lines, but it's not a single line. That's why it's called a non-linear. And if you looked at the plot for the sigmoidal activation function, it is a kind of an S-shaped function, which is also a kind of a non-linear function, right? And each of these hidden layer nodes uses some kind of a activation function, which can be a sigmoidal function or a ReLU function. So what you have is multiple hidden layers, therefore multiple levels of non-linearity, and this multiple levels of non-linearity is what gives the power to the model to form solutions for very challenging problems, right? So if the complexity of the problem that you are trying to solve is large, high, right, then you need to go for more number of hidden layers and also more number of nodes in the hidden layers. Now when you want to solve these problems, first thing that you need to do is train the model, right? What do you mean by training the model? Yeah, you collect a number of training examples, right? For each class you need some number of examples, right? And once you collect the training examples, you want to use them to estimate the parameters of the model, right? And there is a very popular algorithm called the backpropagation learning method, which is known as the gradient descent method, right? And typically when you use this backpropagation method, which is a form of the gradient descent method, it starts with some randomly initialized values of the weights, right? Then as we go through the training process, the training is going to be such that the error will reduce from the initially high error to finally small error, right? That's why it's called the error based training or error correction learning, right? And the number of training steps it takes to reach from the initial weights to the final weights determines what is called the time taken for the convergence of the model. So if you use the standard backpropagation method based on the gradient descent method, right, it typically leads to slow convergence. So one of the important problems that's addressed in deep learning model area is how to make this convergence faster. Okay, there are a number of methods that are being explored, right? And I'll just give the names here and I'll very briefly explain because that requires a lot of mathematical details to be looked into. One of the methods is what is called the generalized delta rule that uses what is called a momentum factor. Then there are what is called the adaptive learning methods namely ADAGRAD, RMS prop, ADADELT and ADAM. When you start using the tools for this, building the models, typically the tools will give you the options, right? And most of the people go for this ADAM method, right? Because that is shown to be the fastest converging method compared to all the other methods, okay? I'll just quickly tell you what you mean by this, okay? Typically, when you want to perform the parameter learning here, the parameter is W, right? Then for the current values of these parameters, there is some error in the output of the model. What do you mean by the error in the output of the model? Let's say if we take a training example, right? That training example belongs to one of the classes, right? Now for the current values of the parameters, if you look at the label given by the model, it may be correct or it may be incorrect, right? If it is correct, then there is no error. If it is not correct, then there is an error, right? So for all the training examples, you can look at what is the error. Then you want to modify the parameters in such a way that the error will decrease, because finally after the training is complete, I want the model to give me correct labels for as many training examples as possible, right? So that's why the change in the parameters is done by looking at how much change will be there in the error when I make any change in the parameters, right? And this eta is what is called the learning rate, which is also a hyperparameter, right? That will also determine how many iterations I have to go through to perform this parameter update in order to reach the final solution. And typically, if I change these parameters after I look at every training example, then this is what is referred to as the pattern mode, and also it's called as the stochastic gradient descent. But if I accumulate the error for all the training examples and then perform the weight update, then this is what is called the batch mode. And typically most of the tools support either the pattern mode or the batch mode, but many results have shown that this pattern mode is the normally preferred method for training the neural network models. So typically when we do this weight update, we take the current value of the weight and then we make some change to that weight. That's indicated by this delta W, and this delta W is indicated by what is called the derivative of this error with respect to the parameter. That's where we get the term called the gradient. That is the slope of this error surface with respect to the weight is what is called the gradient, and this minus sign indicates that we are going down the gradient, right, of the surface. That's why it's called the gradient descent. So basically the simplest method for learning is what is known as the delta rule, where this change in the weight parameter is determined by only this gradient. But this method is known to be very slow in convergence. So there are a number of other methods that have been explored. One simple extension of this delta rule is not only the gradient information, I look at how much change we have made in the previous time step, right? So earlier I would have made some change in the particular parameter, that's referred to by this delta W of m minus 1. So I take a fraction of that, where that fraction is indicated by this alpha, and I make use of this information along with the gradient information to determine how much change I want to make in the weight in the current step. And when we do this, this is what is called as the generalized delta rule, and typically this alpha value is in the range 0 to 1, but typically we go for values close to 1. So when you use this past history of the parameter weight update, it has been shown that it improves the convergence speed of the training of the model. And there is a description of why it happens. Let's not worry about that. So in the gradient descent method, we are looking at only the previous change, which was dependent on the gradient in the previous step. One can look at all the previous gradients and then make use of that information. That's what is done in all these methods like ADAGRAD, RMS prop, ADA delta, or even the ADAM method. Basically what it says is that you make use of the history of how the parameters have been changed over the different steps and make use of that information in determining how much change you want to make in the current step, right? And that has been shown to be very effective in improving the convergence speed, right? Actually, it's an order of magnitude increase, right? What do you mean by that? If you use the simple delta rule, if it takes, let's say, 1000 iterations, right, or what are called 1000 epochs to perform the training process, right? Typically, when you go through any of these methods, that number of epochs required will be a few tens, right? And this is much smaller in number compared to the thousands of epochs it might take, right, to go through the convergence process when you use only the simple delta rule, right? So the first studies that have been made when the deep learning models were introduced in 2006 was how to come up with these different what are known as the optimization methods to train the models very fast. And typically there are other issues one has to deal with when you are building these deep neural network models, right? If the model complexity is low, but the problem that you are trying to solve is very complex, right? Then it leads to what is known as the underfitting because the model is not able to solve the problem. But the other problem comes when the model complexity is high, but still the performance is poor. That happens when the number of training examples available is small. Okay, that leads to what is called the overfitting. So this happens when the model complexity is high, but the training data set size is small. But for many real world problems, especially in the medical image domain, it's very difficult to get large number of training examples. But you want to build a complex model because the problem that you want to solve is complex, right? So if you use a complex model, but if you have very limited number of training examples, that will lead to overfitting. So there are a number of methods that have been explored how to deal with this overfitting problem. There are what are called the regularization methods in the form of what is known as the dropout method, drop connect method, and the batch normalization. I will again very briefly explain what these methods are. So what we do in the drop out method is, let's say this is the model that I want to build. What I do in every parameter update process is that I drop some of the nodes temporarily, right? Like you can see here, in the input layer there are 4 nodes, right? But when I'm going through the training process, in one step, I drop the node 3 here and node 4 in the hidden layer, right? So basically we are dropping out some nodes temporarily during some parameter update process that will lead to reduced number of connections during that particular training step. Here we have dropped the node 3 in the input layer and node 4 in the hidden layer, whereas here I drop the node 2 in the input layer and node 3 in the hidden layer. So at every step we don't drop the same nodes, we drop different nodes, right? This is what is called the dropout method, where we drop a few nodes in the model temporarily during the parameter update process. Another method is what is called the drop connect method, where instead of dropping the nodes, we drop a few connections. Like let's say this is the model, then if I drop all these red colored connections, right, then I'm dropping a few connections in the model. Again, the set of connections that are dropped will change from one training step to another training step. So this is what is called the drop connect method. So both this dropout method and drop connect method have been shown to be fairly effective in dealing with the overfitting problem. Another method is what is called the batch normalization problem. Maybe I'll not go into details because that requires a little bit of mathematics, but this is one of the most extensively used methods again to deal with the overfitting in the deep learning models. Okay. Now we are going to see another important problem that's addressed when we want to train the deep learning models. As we are discussing earlier, typically when you go for a complex model, you need a large number of examples to train the model. But if you use the conventional supervised learning, what do you mean by supervised learning? All the examples that you have are the labeled examples, right? But collecting a large number of labeled examples in any domain is very challenging task, and you may not be able to collect a large number of labeled examples, but you may be able to collect a large number of what are known as the unlabeled examples, right? Like I can just use a camera and shoot the sceneries, right, to collect the images, right? But once I collect the pictures, if I want to generate the labels, right, I have to involve the humans to generate the labels, right? So labeling is a very challenging task and very important task that requires a lot of effort to be put in, right? Basically, it's a very cost involved process, right? So people started thinking, instead of using only the labeled data, if I have the unlabeled data, right, is it possible to use unlabeled data also to train the models? Okay, so many of the deep learning models nowadays go through two phases of training. The first phase is what is called the pre-training. The second one is what is called the fine-tuning. In the pre-training, we make use of only the unlabeled examples, which can be large in number, right? And once I go through this pre-training process, where I don't make use of any label information, then in the fine-tuning, I use the labeled examples. There I make use of the labeled data to perform the training, and that has been shown to be very effective, right? So now we go through the two phases of training. One is the pre-training phase, another one is the fine-tuning phase. There are a number of methods by which one can do the pre-training. We are going to quickly look into what is known as an auto-associative neural network model based method, which leads to what is known as the stacked autoencoder. And once we do the pre-training using the stacked autoencoder, then we use that to build a deep neural network where we do the fine-tuning using the labeled data, right? And this has been shown to be very effective when you have to deal with the model to be complex, but you have very limited number of labeled examples, but you have very large number of unlabeled examples. Again, let me show you some details of this. So what we have as a standard neural network, typically, what is the input to the model? Thank you. A feature vector, right? What is the output of the model? Class labels, right? So I do some kind of a mapping of the feature vector to the class label information, right? So you're associating this class label information with the feature vectors. This is what is called a hetero association. That is, input is different from the output, right? Now can you tell me what is known as a auto association? Hetero association means the input is different from the output, right? When it's auto association, yeah, as the name itself implies, right, you want the output to be same as the input. That's why it's called the auto associative model, right? But that must look very odd. Why do I want to give something as input to the model and then want to generate the same thing as the output, right? But as we are saying, right, it serves a very important purpose. And as you can see here, this is also a feed-forward neural network. The number of nodes in the input layer is D, and the number of nodes in the output layer is also D. So basically, the desired output is same as the input here, right? But I have multiple hidden layers here. But if you look at the middle layer here, the number of nodes in this middle layer is very small compared to the number of nodes in the input layer, right? So what we are doing is, we are doing some kind of a compression, right? That is, if I give D features as the input here, I collect a small number of features as the outputs of the nodes here. Let's say it's some L, okay? So if L is smaller than D, what is I am doing? I am compressing the input to get it as the output of this layer. But how do I know whether that compression is done correctly? So what I do is, I try to reconstruct the input from this compressed output, right? So that's why you can see that there are two parts here. One is the encoder part and the other one is the decoder part. The encoder does the compression and the decoder does the decompression. And how do you evaluate the performance of this model? You give some input and then see whether you are able to reconstruct the input from the compressed representation, right? So auto-associative neural network basically consists of these two parts, right? Encoder and decoder. What is it required to train this model? It's only the X vectors. What are these X vectors? feature vectors. Are you using the class label information anywhere here? We don't use the class label information here, right? So if I have large number of unlabeled examples where for every example I have the feature vector, can I train this model? Right? So basically what is it I do? I take all the examples that we have. The examples may belong to different classes, but I don't have the information about the classes for that, right? Because it's all unlabeled data, right? For each of the examples I have this feature vector. I give that feature vector as input and also say that that is the desired output of this model. Then I train this model for all this unlabeled data. So basically we have captured some information about the data that we want to use. Okay? And what we have done here is we have come up with the compressed representation of this input which can be taken. So as we indicated, right, we can consider this auto-setting network consisting of two parts. One is the encoder and the decoder, and this encoder part of this network is what is referred to as the auto-encoder because it's taken from the auto-setting neural network. Now what we do is very interesting thing, right? We build multiple such networks, right? Let's say this X is 100 dimensional input that I have. If I want to reduce that dimension to 10 directly, it's a very challenging problem, right? So what we do is, we do it in steps. We first reduce from 100 to 60, then 60 to 40, then maybe 40 to 20, right? But we use the same principle. So what it will do in the first network here, I give the 100 dimensional input and I specify the same as the desired output. I train this model. Now let's say this number of nodes in this middle layer, which is the compression layer, is what is referred to as the bottleneck layer, is some L1. Let's say L1 is 60, right? So now after training this model for any 100 dimensional input here, I can get this 60 dimensional representation, right? Now for all the examples that we have, which are in the form of the 100 dimensional vectors, we collect these 60 dimensional vectors as the output of the encoder and use that to build the next model here. You can see what is the dimensionality of the input here, L1, which is the size of the bottleneck layer, that is the number of nodes in the middle layer in the first network. And again I compress from, let's say, 60 to 40 here, right? And then give the desired output as same as this ZL, which was the output that I get from the first model. So what is I am doing? Now I am doing this compression from 60 dimension to the 40 dimension. Again, am I using any labeled information anywhere? No, right? And we again build one more model, right, where it takes this 40 dimensional input and then gets the 20 dimensional representation. Yeah. As you said, we can train this model using unlabeled examples. Yes, we can do the reconstruction. But again, the reconstruction will happen in multiple phases. Yeah, right? Let's say I go through this model and then finally get this 40 dimensional representation, right? I have to use the decoder of this to get this 40 dimensional representation. Use that 40 dimensional representation as input to the decoder here to get the 60 dimensional representation and so on. If you want to reconstruct, but we are not interested in the reconstruction finally, right? What we want to do here is, we want to have these encoders which capture the information about the examples, right? As you'll be seeing later, once we build these models, we'll be ignoring these decoders, right? We'll be taking only these encoders and then use them to build my final model. It's used only for the unsupervised learning, right? Any type of data. It has been extensively used for a variety of types of data. Am I making any assumptions about the type of data? No. Right? I'm only saying that you have input feature vector of some dimension. Right? Now you want to reduce the dimensionality of that. Right? So it can be the feature vector extracted from the images, it can be feature vectors extracted from the text, or it can be feature vectors extracted from speech, or any type of data. It doesn't matter. Right. Okay. Now what we do is, We take out only that encoder modules of these three different networks and then put them together to form this stacked autoencoder. Now, how many layers will be there in each of them? This will have two hidden layers, this will have two hidden layers, and this will have two hidden layers, right? Now, when I put all these things together, what is the model that I am getting? I am getting a model with 6 layers, 6 hidden layers, right? And did I use labeled examples in coming up with the parameters of the model here? No, right? So now I take all these layers. So this is what I am pictorially showing here. So in the first neural network, I had these 2 hidden layers. I put them here. I have this second neural network here. Take that 2 hidden layers there, put them here, and similarly this here. Now I build this stacked autoencoder with the 7 layer structure, but all of them have been already trained with the unlabeled examples, right? So we have learned something about the examples from the particular domain without using any labeled information, right? Now this stacked autoencoder I will use to build a deep neural network to perform the classification task, right? So now already we have estimated the parameters of these layers here. Now I am just putting one output layer here. What will this output layer contain? Number of nodes in the output layer will be equal to the number of classes that you want to solve the pattern classification problem for, right? Now I have already layers which are trained with the unlabeled examples. Now I start from that, because in a standard neural network, what are the initial values of the weights we get started with? It's randomly initialized values of weights, right? Where I have not used any training data when we started with the initial values of the weights. But here I already have weights that are learned from the examples of the particular domain. Now I start with those weights and then perform the classification task. But for performing any classification task, you need the labeled examples, right? So now we use the labeled examples to train the whole model, right? And that's what is called the fine tuning. Why do we call it as fine tuning? Because we already learnt the values or the parameters of the model by using the examples from the domain, fine tune it to make it work for the classification task, right? So basically we see that the training of this autoencoder module is initially done in the unsupervised learning mode using unlabeled examples, and that will form the initial weights for the deep neural network model, where we do the fine tuning use the standard method, right? And then we need to use a only small set of labeled examples to perform this fine tuning. So what is it we have done? We have solved a complex task, but I have very limited number of labeled examples, but I have a large number of unlabeled examples, right? So I use unlabeled examples to perform the unsupervised learning in the pre-training phase, and you use the small number of labeled examples to perform only the fine tuning, right? And finally able to build a fairly complex model to solve my complex problem, right? As you'll be seeing later, this kind of a training where we have 2 phases of training. One is the pre-training phase and the fine tuning phase. Pre-training phase is always done in the unsupervised mode, whereas the fine tuning is done using the supervised mode. Is the kind of common characteristic of many deep learning models, right? Because all the deep learning models will have large number of parameters to be learned, and that requires large number of examples to be used. But you can't get large number of labeled examples, right? But you can collect a large number of unlabeled examples, use them for the pre-training, and then do the fine tuning with only a small number of labeled examples. Yeah. Any questions? No. We are talking about the same domain. Yes. Let's say if I am talking about animal classification task, I am collecting the examples of the animal images only. But only thing is I don't need the labeled examples, right? Because you can't do the pre-training using one domain data and fine-tuning using another domain data, right? Yeah. That may not work well. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Good. So basically what is it we have done is, one can construct a fairly complex model, right, by using this stacked autoencoder method for pre-training. And do the fine tuning with the labeled examples. Again, one can do the regularization in this to improve the convergence and so on. There is a very interesting problem that can also be solved using this stacked autoencoders. Actually, it may be relevant for the medical images, where we do what is called image denoising. Right? What do you mean by image denoising? You have a noisy image, you want to reduce the noise in the given image. Okay? That's what is called the denoising. So what we can do in this model is, assuming that we have few examples of clean image and the corresponding noise image, right? I can build this structure, again consisting of a number of autoencoders followed by the decoders, right? Where I give the noise image as the input, right? And I specify the clean image as the desired output. This is not a completely unsupervised method, right? But you are not giving the labels as the desired output. The desired output is also an image, right? But what is the difference between the input and the output here? Input is a noise image and the desired output is the clean image, right? So once you train this model with the noise image as the input and the clean image as the output, right? Then after the model is trained, if you give any new noisy image, it can generate the clean image for that noisy image. Basically, we are training the model to remove the noise or at least reduce the noise, right, in the noisy image and then generate the clean image as far as possible, right? So this stacked autoencoder based method for image denoising has been again explored for many domains, especially in the cases of where the images are very noisy, right? And it's directly difficult to use the noise images, right? So if you can do the denoising, you'll get a better image. Then you do the processing and then do whatever the task is required. Okay. The next topic I'll briefly touch upon, but I'm sure it has been already covered. Some basics have been covered. Anyway, I'll just cover some important aspects of that which are required for our discussions. Okay. So these convolutional neural networks are the most extensively used models for the image and the video data. Of course, nowadays people are also using it for audio, speech and the text data. We'll focus mainly on the image data. And they are mainly designed for the images to deal with the kind of variations that typically occur in the images. Okay. And it has got a particular type of structure where the structure of the model will make it kind of robust to the typical forms of distortions that occur in the images. One is what is called the translation. What do you mean by the translation? If you take two images of similar scenarios, right? An object may be present in the first image and also in the second image, but they are not present in the exactly same position, right? There can be slight difference in the positions of the objects in the given image, right? But as long as you are interested in identifying the object in the image, it's immaterial whether the object is present in one part of the image or another part of the image, right? So these kind of variations are what are called the translational variations. Other one is what is called the scaling variations. What do you mean by the scaling variations? The sizes of the objects may be slightly different from one image to another image. Again, as we have seen in the first slide, the size of the animal present in the image is not really critical for us, right? So our classification system should be robust to the size variations, right? So this kind of variations due to changes in size is what are called the scaling variations. And the skewing is, again, it's not at the same angle, right? There can be difference in skewing, right? And typically there are large number of other types of variations. So basically these convolutional networks are mainly designed for classification of the images where there can be this kind of distortions related to the translational variations or the scaling variations or the skewing variations, right? And one of the most commonly used CNN models which started in 1998, even before the advent of the deep learning field, is what is known as the CNN for handwritten character recognition, called as the LeanIt 5, which is named after the first author of this paper who proposed this. Okay. So basically, it's a convolutional neural model that's designed for recognition of the handwritten characters. All right. Let's say I have English alphabet, only uppercase letters. If I ask each of you to write the letter A, and if I collect those examples, what kind of variations you can expect among these examples that we collect? Will they be of the same size? I'll give you a grid and ask you to write in the grid. Will you write in exactly in the same position? No. Will you write them with the same angle? No. Right? So you can see that you have all these kind of variations like translation variations, scale variations, and the skew variations. Right? So we want a system which can recognize the characters that you write irrespective of all these variations. Right? So this first model was designed to perform this handwritten character recognition task. As you can see here, the number of nodes in the output layer is 26, corresponding to the 26 letters in the English alphabet. And we give the image itself as the input to the model. Unlike in the standard neural networks, where we typically extract features and then give those features as the input to the model, one advantage of this CNN models is that you can give the raw image itself as the input to the model. You don't normally do any feature extraction and then input those features as the input to the CNN model, right? Because we want the model to learn how to extract the features from the given data. This is what is called the representation learning. What do you mean by representation? Given any data, what kind of features you want to extract from the data, right? So all along before the deep learning models came into the picture, we were doing what is called hand-picked feature extractions. What do you mean by hand-picked feature extraction? The designer of system decides which features to be extracted, then uses the domain knowledge to extract those features, right? But if you look at most of the deep learning models nowadays, right, we give the raw data as the input, right? What do you mean by the raw data as the input? In the case of the image, it's the pixel level information. In the case of the text, it is the words, right? So we leave it for the model to learn what features to be extracted from the data, right? That's why this representation learning is the most important aspect of learning in the deep learning models. There are conferences on this. There are international conferences on the learning of the representations, right? Emphasizing that the representation learning is the most important task in the process of building these deep learning models. So we give the raw image as the input here. So in this case, it's a 32 by 32 pixels, right? And typically, when we extract the features in the normal conventional methods, we look at the complete image and then extract the features. Like if you look at the color histogram features, right? Typically, that representation contains information about the complete content of the image. These are what are called the global features extracted from the image. Typically, the global features are not as effective as what are called the local features, because in local feature extraction, we focus on parts of the image and extract features from each part of the image. So what this convolutional neural networks do is perform this local feature extraction. What part of the image you consider for the feature extraction is specified by what is called a kernel. Okay. Typically, this kernel is of some size. It's a 3x3 kernel or a 5x5 kernel or a 7x7 kernel. What do you mean by this 3x3, 5x5? We are taking 3 by 3 pixels or 5 by 5 pixels or 7 by 7 pixels and process only those pixels to extract one feature, right? So what is shown here is a window that focuses on one part of the image of certain size, and one neuron here uses one kernel to extract the information from these pixels and in the process extract one feature from that part. But as we already know, it's not enough if you extract only one feature from a part of the image. You need to extract multiple features, right? So that's why you see that there are multiple what are called the feature maps, right? Each of these feature maps extract one type of feature from one part of the image, right? And the kernels that will be used in these different feature maps may be of the same size, but what are called the kernel parameters will be different. When the kernel parameters are different, the kind of processing that you do on the pixels to extract the feature will be different. So the features that you extract will be different, right? So depending on how many features that you want to extract from each of these local parts, that will decide what is called this number of feature maps, right? How many feature maps are here? There are what are called the 6 feature maps, which means that from every part of the image here, I extract 6 different features. One feature map here extracts one type of feature, second feature map extracts another type of feature, right? But all of them take only the 3 by 3 pixels information and then process it. Yeah. Yes. We'll come to that. Yeah. So this is the first level of processing that we do, right? So we take one input image, right? And then extract these local features, where from every local region we extract, in this case, 6 features. And because there are multiple such regions in the given image, right? When you extract one type of feature, all those features put together forms one feature map. Okay? Yeah. Now we can see that the number of feature maps and therefore the number of features that we extract is very large, right? So we do some kind of a reduction of these features by doing what is called the pooling, right? So we take the adjacent features that are extracted from the adjacent regions of the given image, then we do some kind of an averaging operation, right? Or you find out the maximum of those, right? Let's say in the pooling layer, I use a 2x2 window, right? What am I doing? I'm taking the 4 features extracted from the 4 neighboring regions on the original image, and then I'm taking the average of them in the main pooling, right? So for every 4 features, I have one feature now representing them, right? So basically we reduce the size of this feature map. That's why you can see that from 28 cross 28 feature maps here, when you do the pooling, right, it reduces to 14 cross 14. Okay? Now we extracted some features and then we have done some kind of pooling on that, right? But like in the standard neural network, why do you have multiple hidden layers? Each of those hidden layers does some kind of a new feature extraction, right? Here also, from the features that are extracted here, I want to extract some new features, right? That's why we have one more what is called the convolutional layer here, right? How do you extract new features? You take the earlier features, you combine them, and then extract some new features. Now we have 6 features extract from each region here. How many different ways you can combine them? You can combine only 2 features out of 6, 3 features out of 6, then which pairs of features, which groups of 3 features, right? So that decides what combinations of these features you want to process to extract some new features. That's why the number of feature maps is larger here, right? Basically, we are extracting new features from the features that are extracted in this first layer here, right? And then these new features are extracted, then again we do some kind of a reduction of the features, right, by using the pooling layer, right? And finally, the outputs of these feature maps in this second pooling layer will all go as input to the nodes in the output layer. Mainly, we have extracted some features from the input data, and we want to use that feature information to perform the classification task. Okay? So what is it we give as input to this model here? Image and the class label of that image, right, when you are doing the training. But we don't do any feature extraction here, right, because we want the model to do an appropriate feature extraction for depending on the type of the data that you are dealing with, right? Here in this case, I am talking about character, handwritten character data. It can be any other type of image data, right? So accordingly, I'll be extracting different types of features, okay? And all of these are hyperparameters. How many convolution layers you want to use, how many pooling layers you want to use, how many feature maps you want to use in each of these layers, right? These are all hyperparameters. All of that needs to be determined by doing only the experiments. But interesting thing is, whatever is the backpropagation learning method that we used in this standard neural network model can also be used to train these models, right? And all these convergence problems, right? Overfitting problems, all of that we had will also be happening here. And what are the optimization methods that I talked about, or what are the regulation methods that I talked about, can also be used here, right, to make the models to converge faster and to perform better, right, if you have the overfitting issues, right? And these CNNs have been most extensively studied and explored, and they have been, yes, yeah, yes, right, yes, yes, that's part of the design of the model, right? Yeah, I can talk about only pairs of features being combined or groups of 3 features being combined and so on, right? We can use all of them, right? That's why you can see that there are many more features there. Good, okay. So there have been many complex convolutional networks that have been developed over the past 10 to 15 years. One of the most popular models is what is called the VGG net, which stands for that Visual Geometry Group from the Oxford University. And all these complex, which are called as the deep convolutional neural networks, mainly because the number of layers between the input and the output layer is very, very large. These are what are called as the deep convolutional neural networks. And all of these have been typically trained for very complex problems data set called as the image net. Okay, basically it's for the images, but there are 1,000 different classes of the images, and I think there are large number of examples available for each of these classes, right? I think if I remember correct, I think it's of the order of 1 million or maybe a few millions of examples that are available, right? And you can see that the classification task is complex mainly because there are 1,000 classes, and many of these classes are very similar to one another. That makes the complexity of the task to be very, very high. Okay, so people have tried with the different structures. What is shown in the black colored here are what are called the convolutional layers, and all the blue color layers are what are called the pooling layers. And finally, after this series of convolution followed by the pooling layers, then you do what is called a fully connection layer. Basically, you take all the features from the final pooling layer and put them into a one feature vector and then feed it through a series of fully connected layers. And finally, you can see that the output layer consists of 1,000 nodes because the number of classes is 1,000. Again, the input is raw data, image as the input, right? And it does all the feature extraction that's required and then also perform the classification task. So there have been number of deep CNN models that have been developed for this ImageNet data. When you read the papers, you come across all these names like AlexNet, VGGNet, ResNet, and so on, GoogleNet. All of these use different structures. A few innovations that have been brought in there, but all of them have been trained for this ImageNet data to solve a complex 1,000 class classification problem. You can find the details of the performance of these different models in this paper, which was published in 2017. Okay. There are a couple of variations of the CNN model that have been developed for some specific tasks related to image processing. Let's say you're not interested in the classification task, but if you are interested only in the segmentation task. Why do you want to do a segmentation task? Yeah, to identify the regions of interest. Then you can perform a detailed analysis of each of those regions, right? Like I was talking about the captioning for an image, where you identify the different regions of interest and then come up with labels for each of those regions of interest or the description of that regions of interest, right? So the first task there is how to identify the regions of interest, which involves basically the segmentation, right? So there is a special type of CNN model which has been developed only for the segmentation of the images, and it's called the UNet. Why is it called as the UNet? Mainly, if you look at the structure of this model, it's in the form of a letter U. Okay, but if you focus And the details of this, it basically consists of convolution layers and the pooling layers, right? So basically here you have input image, then one convolution layer, and yeah. So basically you have two convolution layers here. The output of the second convolution layer goes as input to the next set of layers, and the output of this convolution layers go as input to this, so on, right? Only thing as you can see is that the number of feature maps is varied and the size of the kernels is varied, right? And it has been mainly designed for the segmentation task. As shown in this top example here, given this image, I am interested in only the region where this animal is present, right? And once I get that region, then I can do the processing only in that part of the image, and then do whatever is the task that's required, right? So you can see that the output of this model is saying that this is the part of the image that contains the object of interest to us. Okay, so this is where there's only one entity of interest, but there can be multiple entities of interest to us, right? Which involves, given an image, I want to form multiple segments, right? Where size of each segment can be different. As you can see here, I get 4 different segments because there are 4 different objects of interest here, right? How to come up with a segmentation of this given image into this 4 different regions of interest is the task that has been addressed here. Like this, the number of objects of interest will vary from one image to image. The sizes of these regions of interest will vary from one image to another image, right? And I want a model which can take an image as input without having to specify how many objects are there, how many regions of interest to be identified. I want the model to come up with this segmentation done, right? So if you are interested only in the segmentation task, right, one can use this unit model, right? Again, all these models are available for you to download and then use. That's very interesting thing. Okay. Only thing is, these models would have been trained on some data, right? And in order to make these models to work for your data, you need to do some kind of a fine tuning on these models. Okay. There is one more very commonly used variation of the CNN model, which is used not only for segmentation, but also to identify the objects or to detect the objects that are present in the given image. Earlier I was talking about given image, how to identify the different entities of interest in that, right? So that's the kind of task that's being performed here. So what is it we are saying here? Given image like this, I want to tell where the different objects of interest are there. What are the objects of interest in this case? There are several persons and people are riding the bicycles, right? So I want to identify the different parts of the image where in each part either the person is present or a cycle is present, right? It's not only performing segmentation, I also need to tell whether the particular region contains a person or a cycle, right? So it's a segmentation as well as coming up with the identifying what type of object is present, right? Again, this is one of the important requirements when you are doing the image processing task. So there is what is called a faster region-based CNN model, which has been built for this kind of a object detection task. It's again some kind of variation of the CNN model. It uses the standard CNN model, and it also takes some output from the region proposals, which is done by using some technique for the identification of the regions of interest. Then it combines both the CNN model output and this regions of interest information, and then uses that to identify the different objects that are present in the given image. And it's not just telling which objects are present, it also has to tell in which part of the image which object is present, right? And that's a very challenging task, and this is one of the most successful models to perform this object detection. Yeah. Any questions? This one? Yeah. So here, like if you take this simple example, I'm giving an image. I want to find out what are the different objects of interest here, right? it's not only finding out which parts of the image that are present, I also wanted to tell what is that object, right? So in this case, I have two objects of interest here. One is the person, another one is the horse, right? So it has to tell me this part of the image contains the person, the bottom part here contains the horse, right? This is a simple case. This is a more complex case. I have several persons riding the bicycles, right? Now I want this system to tell me in which part of the image there are persons present and where the cycles are present and how many different persons are there, right? And the numbers here show that what is the probability with which I can say that there is a person that's present there. Okay, yeah. So that's what we want this model to do. Yeah. Good. Any other questions? Sorry, which one? Yeah. Stacked dot encoder, right? Yes. No, no, no. We are taking the examples from the same domain.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But the earlier models you mentioned, AICTE, so many other models,
No, these are all supervised learning models.
they're all on unsupervised.
No, 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 no. They are all supervised learning models. I only said that we give the raw image as the input. But what is the desired output? It's the class labels. So we are not talked about pre-training for this models yet. Yeah.
Whenever we use these models, Alexa, etc.,
Right.
these models for pre-training,
That kind of pre-training is different. Okay. I think what you are asking is slightly different. See, all these models like AlexNet, VGGNet, GoogleNet, they have been already trained with this ImageNet data.
but they are trained on the very large data.
Correct. Right? Now, yeah, because they have been trained on this ImageNet data, they captured information about variety of images, right? And that information is available in the weights that have been learned, right? If you make a very important assumption, whether that assumption holds good or not is a big question. If you want to use this model for your own domain images, we make a very important assumption that some information about this new domain is also there in the domain that has been used to train these models. Okay? And because they have used huge amount of data belonging to a large number of classes, typically any other images that you want to use with, right, will be kind of assumed to be somewhat related to that, right? So nowadays it's very common thing for many people to make use of this pre-trained CNN models, right? But important thing to note is that these pre-trained models are not trained in the unsupervised mode, right? They have been trained only in the supervised mode, but they are all trained with the data from that ImageNet data set. So what people do is, they take this model, remove the output layer, right? Now you consider the remaining part as a feature extractor, right? Now you give your own images as input in this model and then take those feature vectors. Now those feature vectors will give as input to your new model. Let's say you want to build a classification model using standard neural network model, right? Let's say it's a two hidden layer model, right? That will have input layer, two hidden layers and the output layer. Output layer will have a number of classes depending on what problem that you are solving. But typically, earlier you would have extracted some features from the data and then used it as input to this model. Now what you can do is give your images as input to this pre-trained CNN model, take the output of the pre-final layer. They call it as transfer learning. Okay, so take the output of the pre-final layer in this model, that's considered as the feature vector representation of the image, and use that as input to your model, right? Because it has been trained on a large amount of data, it is assumed that it can extract the features from any type of images, right? And it has worked in most of the cases, but my understanding is that it doesn't work for the medical image data. Because the medical images are completely different from the type of images that have been used to train these models, right? Spectrograms also typically will not work on this, because spectrograms are basically representation of the audio data, right? So typically these models are not really trained with any images that are close to the spectrogram. People try, right? Yeah, because you can consider the spectrograph as an image, right? And then give that image as input to this ImageNet model, take the output of the pre-final layer, right? And then consider it as representation of that and then feed it into your model, right? Correct. No, typically they are all either 256 by 256 pixels or 512 by 512 pixels. Oh, correct.
Yeah, they have taken very large number of images.
Correct.
Okay, my question is, what about the images? Let us say in my phone I have captured some new images.
Right.
Which are not there in that.
Right.
Let us assume that.
Yes.
Okay, so what
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter, right? You take your images. Only thing is you have to bring the size of that your image to the size of the input image of the model. Let's say this is using a 128 by 128 pixel image as input, right? But your image may be 256 by 256 pixels. You have to scale it down, right? Then feed it into this model. Then take the feature extraction output from that, and then use that, right? Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, I think it's time for break. Okay, good. Yeah, we'll pause here, okay, and we'll take a break. We'll continue in the next session. Good. No, it's up to you. You tell me when you want me to do. Anytime is fine. Yeah.
reference to train model, textually trained models?
ಜ್ಞಾನದೇಗುಲವೇ ಬೀಡು ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ ಕಡಲಿನ ತಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅರಿವು ಮೂಡಿಸುವ ಗುರುವೇ ದೇವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಗುಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಾಧನೆಯ ಮುಟ್ಟು ಮೆಟ್ಟಿಲು ಹತ್ತುವುದಿಲ್ಲೇ ಮೊದಲು ವಿದ್ಯೆಯೇ ನಮ್ಮಯ ಹಕ್ಕು ನಾಳೆಯ ದಿಕ್ಕು ಜೀವನದ ಸೆಲೆಯು ಎರೆಯುತ್ತ ಜ್ಞಾನ ತೆರೆಸುತ್ತ ಕಣ್ಣ ಈ ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೊನ್ನ ಕಿರಣ ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ನಮನ ನಮನ ಎರೆಯುತ್ತ ಜ್ಞಾನ ತೆರೆಸುತ್ತ ಕಣ್ಣ ಈ ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೊನ್ನ ಕಿರಣ ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಸುತ್ತ ಕಣ್ಣ ಈ ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೊನ್ನ ಕಿರಣ ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇನೆ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ನಮನ ನಮನ
ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ
ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ. ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇನೆ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ. ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ, ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ, ನಮನ ನಮನ.
ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು, ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು.
ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ. ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇನೆ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ. ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ, ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ, ನಮನ ನಮನ.
ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು, ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು. ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು, ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು. ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು, ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು. ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು, ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು.
ಎರೆಯುತ್ತ ಜ್ಞಾನ ತೆರೆಸುತ್ತ ಕಣ್ಣ ಈ ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೊನ್ನ ಕಿರಣ. ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ. ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇನೆ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ. ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ, ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ, ನಮನ ನಮನ.
ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು, ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು.
ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ನಮನ ನಮನ
ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು
ಎರೆಯುತ್ತ ಜ್ಞಾನ ತೆರೆಸುತ್ತ ಕಣ್ಣ ಈ ವಿದ್ಯೆ ಹೊನ್ನ ಕಿರಣ ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ನಮನ ನಮನ
ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಈ ಬದುಕು
ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ